Well, first off, I want to say thank you for Wild Sheep, Montana Wild Sheep, Corey, for getting me involved in this. This is actually my first banquet I've ever been to, but now that I live here in Montana, this is definitely something that we hope to do a lot more of, are things just like this that Montana Wild Sheep does. And forgive me if I stumble, stammer, pass out, whatever, to try to get through this. This is not my thing by any stretch of the imagination. When Corey asked me, I wanted to say no, 10 ways from Sunday, but with the encouragement of my wife, or the forcing of my wife, she told me that I better do that. So here I am. But real quick, I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there, a lot of you that don't know who this long-haired hippie is. I've been pretty under the radar for a lot of years, and I've been very comfortable with that. But I'm Washington State native. Basically, I've lived there for 45 years of my life, and unfortunately, I'm just 2 years into my Montana experience, and couldn't have got here fast enough. I've got a wife, Hillary. She co-hosts the podcast that we do, the Hunt Harvest Health podcast, Doc Hill. My wife has been a Bozeman. Well, she graduated from Bozeman. She grew up in Bozeman, MSU, all that. And somehow she decided to leave Bozeman a long time ago because I think she thought it was too small. But ended up in Seattle, ended up at a fishing lodge in Alaska. I was guiding up there. I think I got out of high school, and I couldn't wait to start adventuring, exploring. Got up to Alaska, headed over to Russia, and spent as many days and years as I could just traveling the world exploring. But I happened to meet my wife up there, and never would have guessed I'd meet some piping hot Montana native up in Alaska, but I did. And very fortunate for that. Got 2 kids. We kind of started late. I got a 4-year-old and an 11-year-old. Basically, I've been a lifelong sportsman, outdoorsman, hunter, fisherman my entire life, and that's kind of what has set me into this lifestyle. Is it got me to Alaska, it got me to Russia, it got me traipsing through the mountains with my father. A lot of this talk I want to do today is just that. I want to talk about what's got me to the point where I am today. Some of the mentors, I want to give thanks to them. I also want to talk a little bit about mentoring and how we can maybe help kind of promote what we do. Get this lifestyle that we love. All of you here love. I'm sure that's why you're here, and kind of promote that to folks outside of our community. But again, if I'm uncomfortable looking up here, it's because I am. I am an introvert. Happy to say I've been an introvert my entire life. No way in heck would you have ever got me on a stage, even in high school. I was that guy in the back of the class. Not a chance you were going to get me on the stage, but here I am today. So working through it, trying to get a little bit more comfortable doing these type things. So when Corey asked me to come up, he didn't really give me a specific as far as what he wanted me to do. He said, maybe tell a couple of stories. Just act like you're talking to your buddies, tell a couple of, cool hunting stories, and that should be it. I think he also mentioned there might be a handful of people here, like maybe 50 or 60 people. And then once I agreed, I got a call back like 2-3 weeks later, and he said, there might be a few more than that. There might be 100 plus folks showing up to this event. So how dare you, Corey? But all right, so when I started thinking about a couple of stories, I was like, man, I could tell, some pretty cool adventure stories, some big trips that I've had, in some pretty cool places. Maybe a funny story would be good. Everybody like to hear that. Challenging stories, something with success at the end. But honestly, there's a couple stories that jumped out to me that I feel like sharing with you guys tonight. They're just like really meaningful, profound stories that I had in my life. One of those stories was a story in my first year. That's what kind of propelled me into, the person that I am today. Fortunate to have a dad that got me into, this thing that we all love to do. But I'm going to tell that story right now. Um, that's me. I think I was 14 years old. And this story, it means more to me now than it did back then. Back then, it was just kind of a spooky thing that happened, and I'll get to that. But there's a lot that went into this story, and I want to talk about the mentorship that my dad provided me throughout this. But the story of this deer right here, Washington High Country, November hunt, rifle hunt with my father, park at a trailhead, I don't know, maybe 7,000 feet on the edge of a wilderness area. And I was all gung-ho that morning to get up and just get after it. My father, he's usually pretty gung-ho, but I wanted to get on the trail. I knew where I wanted to go. We kind of knew where we were going to meet up. But I took off early that morning, a little bit ahead of my cousin, a little bit ahead of my dad. There was three of us. We had a fresh blanket of snow that day. About 6 miles in on that hike that morning, it was just starting to get light. I started pretty early. And lo and behold, I kind of look up and remember this, I have not ever shot anything in my life. I've seen a couple of deer come back with my father, but I look up on the hill and I see two bucks just kind of sparring around, young bucks. And but to me, they look like giants. I think I was sporting like 8 by 30 Bushnells back then. I don't know, this was late 80s, so this is a long time ago. 2 bucks. Couldn't, just like, this was a dream for me. This has been a dream of mine for a long, long time. But, so I think, all right, well, I'm just gonna go up there. I'm gonna make my dad super proud. I'm gonna go up there, I'm gonna shoot a buck, I'm gonna drag that thing right down to the trail. By the time he gets to me, I'm gonna have this buck just sitting here. Well, I dump my pack, drop my gloves, drop everything that I have except for my rifle. I start scurrying up this little wood line. Get out there a couple hundred yards and kind of peek my way out of those trees, and I cannot find that buck. He's gone. I walk over, I find their tracks, and I start in on those tracks. And those tracks led me up to the top of the mountain, where I kind of got to the top, and I was a long way up. It probably took me, I don't know, an hour and a half to get up to the top. Get up to the top, look down in that next basin over the next field, and way, way down on the bottom, I can barely see these things, but I see these 2 bucks doing the same thing. They're sparring around down in this meadow. I think, well, I got to go after them. Not remembering I had left everything back at the trail back there. So I kind of slide down this rock chute on my butt, get down in there. It was tough. It was like, I probably shouldn't have been doing it, especially with the gear that I had. And I get down there to the bottom, stay on those tracks. Long story short, I ended up getting up on these bucks, get within 100 yards. And I get my rifle down, set up, take the shot, and I dump this buck. And I walk up to it, I'm the happiest kid on the planet. 14 years old, just took my first buck, and it's a 4-point. That's like what dreams were made of back then, right? Just a 4-point, that's all I wanted. And so here's where things got a little weird. I'm looking at this buck, and I don't really know what to do with this thing. This is something that I haven't seen happen. I think maybe I read some Outdoor Life, and I kind of knew how, you pull the guts out, pack it with snow, whatever. But, so I kind of crudely break this thing down. I can't really remember at this point, but got the guts out, pack it with snow. But I really want to take this head out with me. I don't have a backpack, but I really want to take this. I want to show my dad what I did. And if you can see in this picture, you can see there's a lot of head there. There's a lot of neck there. I didn't know what I was doing, so I cut that thing down, like right above the shoulders is where I cut it. And, knowing now what I know, I don't know how many pounds. This is probably an extra 10, 15 pounds of meat there. So I cut it off, and I'm looking back at where I came from. And there's no way I want to go back up those chutes. I remember sliding down through this boulder field, and it was rough. It was a rough go. And so I kind of looked down ridge, And I'm looking down there and I'm thinking, man, that ridge kind of cuts down like this. All I got to do is like hoof it over here, and the trail's on the bottom on the other side. All I got to do is go over here and cut down and diagonal down to the trail. I'll meet up at the trail. Hopefully my dad will be there. So I go over and I start doing that. Well, the weather comes in and fog rolls in, starts snowing like crazy. My tracks are getting covered up. What happened was I got to that ridge, I started cutting down, and there was kind of a ghost ridge that I didn't see or didn't know of. And so in the fog, I'm kind of walking down this deal. Well, I just keep turning in the fog, and I can't really tell I'm turning, but I am. And I keep going and keep going and keep going. And I don't remember how many hours I walked, but I was walking until it started to get dark. I had no gloves, I had no backpack, I had nothing, I had no idea. This is before GPS, this is before any of that. It was a handheld compass and that's all you had. When I was 14, I didn't even know how to work one of those things. So, it was coming down really hard. And, now I'm starting to worry and I'm thinking, man, there was one point where I fired my gun 3 times, not knowing what that would do. Again, I probably read that in an Outdoor Life somewhere. It's like if you're in trouble, fire a gun 3 times, somebody will come running. But this is way back in this wilderness area that there's really nobody back there at all. There was nobody at the trailhead that morning. Well, lo and behold, I kind of start getting to the point where I don't know what I'm going to do because I'm completely lost. I can't backtrack. My tracks are getting covered up too fast. And I'm looking ahead of me, and it's pretty thick, but I see this dude walking right in front of me. I'm thinking, first I didn't really know what it was, but I saw a guy, and he disappeared into the white. So I walk over there, and it was a man. He'd gotten out to get a little firewood and bring it back into his wall tent. He had been dropped. There was 2 guys. They had been dropped off back there, drop camped into the wilderness. They were the only ones back there. Somehow, some way, I stumbled onto these guys, these gentlemen, in the middle of nowhere, and that shouldn't have happened. I could have been 30 feet one way or another. I never saw that camp ever. If that guy wouldn't have been walking out to get firewood at that second, I would have never seen this guy. And very nice guys. They were shocked when I poked my head into that wall tent. There's this young, baby-faced kid. He's got a rifle and he's got a big old giant, tiny buck with a big old neck on it and a lot of meat. And I had no food up until that point. It had been a lot of hours and it was dark. Had no light. So immediately these guys tell me, they're like, well, you got to stay here. Like, we got to keep you here, right? There's no way we can really let you just go wander from here. You got nothing. But I was adamant. I was like, look, my dad's going to be trying to find me, and I know he's going to be super worried. I have to, find my way out. So he unrolled this paper map, shows me where I'm at. And I'd done a little bit of summer hiking back there, so I kind of knew a little bit of the trail system. And the guy shows me where I'm at. He says you got to go up these switchbacks. You got about 1.5 miles there. You got 2 miles here, and then you got 4 miles back, and you'll be back to that campground. But I'm so far away. And so what he did was he walked me about 1.5 miles, and he, kind of shined the light up these switchbacks and gave me a little mag light. I didn't think we had headlights back then in the late 80s. I don't think they'd been invented yet. But one of those little mag lights. And they fed me a little bit of food, gave me a water bottle. So at least let us hold this buck here while you go, try to find your way out. And there was no way I was going to give up that buck at that point. I really wanted to get that thing back to show my dad. But somewhere in that hike, I got up the switchbacks and I got, down the trail a little ways, but I was so tired. I had no endurance, no go power back then. I was 14. And I was so tired, I started dry heaving, puking up the food that they gave me. Just from that, I was wore out. And I finally, at a certain point, dumped that deer head. I set it down as much as I didn't want to. Set my gun down right up next to it on the trail and started hiking out. I got back to the main trail that night and ran into my father, who was my cousin, and him were coming back in to try to find me. Super worried, super happy to see me, but We ended up getting back to camp at 1 o'clock that morning. Somehow, some way, we got back. Next day, now we got to go back and get that buck. And did the same exact thing. We took the same route. My father, we slid down, all three of us slid down on our butts, down into that basin. We got all the meat. We're looking back up, and my dad said the same thing. He's like, man, there's not a chance we're going back up that. But if we go over to this ridge, and then we just cut around and we'll go back to the trail, I was arguing with him, and he's like, no, we got up to that ridge, and sure enough, the snow starts coming in again. But it was probably the one time where I argued with my dad and I won, right? Because I was adamant, I was like, Dad, there's not a chance I'm going back down in that hole again. We got to cut up this ridge a ways and go back down. I figured it out. And so we did that, and it was another one of those all-night death marches. But we got out of there, fortunately. But I look back at that now, and I feel so fortunate because I don't know what the percentages were for me to run into a camp, the one and only drop camp in this entire wilderness area. And I happened to walk right into it at a time where I really needed something. I had nothing. I knew nothing. So that's kind of the story of my first deer. And, as scary as that was, a lot of folks have asked, like, well, what did that deter you from wanting to go? And it had, I think it would have, with anybody, it had the complete opposite. It's like, I just needed to learn more. I wanted to figure it out better, be more of a mountain man, not be able to get lost because that's embarrassing. And then just, I wanted to learn more. And I think my dad, at that point, he realized, like, he had made some mistakes. Like, there were some things he didn't teach me, he didn't do correctly. As good of a mentor as he was, I think he realized at that point, like, man, I did some things wrong here. So he stepped up after that, and he taught me a lot. So my first mentor, obviously, was my father. I was very lucky to have one that was a big outdoorsman, big-time Northwest steelhead fisherman, guy loved to chucker hunt. There's a lot of things that I learned from my father that I got from him that I still have today. One of those was, endurance, stay power. The guy would just never quit. He was a labor, hard worker, and he did that in his work, he did that in his hunting, he did that in his fishing. He was a dawn to dusk type guy, and I'm so fortunate to have been, raised by a man like that who taught me so much. But so who in here, like, if I may ask a show of hands, like, who in here has had a hunting mentor in their life that got them into what you guys all love today? Pretty much everybody, for the most part, I would guess. Yeah, imagine if you didn't have one. I think back, trying to figure out, like, what would I be doing right now if I had no mentor in my life? My father would not have been a sportsman or an outdoorsman. I have no idea what I would have done. I could have gotten in trouble. I could have, went out partying instead of going out and thinking about fishing or hunting. Done a lot of things wrong. But I think mentors are really, really important. And I fortunately had a few of them. There's my old man, there's my dad. He was more of a blacktail hunter on the coast, more of a chucker, hunter, like I said, Pacific Northwest steelheader. But that's us. Now, I want to talk about my uncle, Uncle Ron, crazy Uncle Ron. This is my dad's brother, but this guy, he was a engineer by trade. He had a passion for adventure like I have now. Big time, elk hunter, deer hunter. He'd travel around. He was that guy that he'd hunt at the Sonora. He'd come back and he'd have stories of all these giant muley bucks and hunting elk in the Idaho Panhandle in the wilderness up there. And he'd come back and he'd feed me these stories. And he got me so excited about hunting that I kind of glommed onto him for a lot of years there in my teens. And he took me to a lot of places, one of those being North Idaho. And I think I learned, I learned a lot from Ron in those days because these trips weren't just like overnighters. These weren't just weekend trips. if Ron was going hunting, he was carving out 2 weeks. No doubt about it. He'd take 2 weeks every time, just to make sure that he got everything right. Everything was in his favor. This is a guy that was really, really, really good at planning everything, every detail, every stock, gear. That was his thing. Being an engineer, he was really good at it. So I learned a lot from him. Ron was a character. He was a goofball, but he absolutely loved hunting. I mean, we had the best of times, and I was real fortunate to have those times in up there in Idaho and all over. But we were muzzleloader guys back then. Ron was kind of an old crusty guy that he was into black powder, old school, and we had a lot of fun. Just some of the pictures that are from so far back. Actually, I had to take these pictures like out of the old photo album, like take pictures of them. They're really old. But, this guy had a knack for adventure. We'd load up the llamas, head into the North Panhandle. This was pre-wolf days in North Idaho, where there was a lot of elk, a lot of bulls. We had opportunities galore. Whitetail, elk, and we never came home empty-handed. But, I think what Ron taught me is don't let anything up there stop you from pushing harder. It didn't matter what weather. If weather came in and we saw guys leaving, that's when we wanted to head up into it and stick it out. And Ron would laugh at those guys that come out. He'd make fun of them. And to the point that I never wanted to be one of those guys that left because of weather, because of hardship, difficulty. We'd sit it out in that wall tent as long as it took to where that weather broke and we had opportunities to go hunt. So, one thing about Ron was this guy loved mule deer. And like I said, he would travel far and wide to go hunt mule deer. This guy would go to Sonora and he'd chase giant bucks, old age class bucks everywhere, Idaho, Montana, Washington. And so learning from this guy, even though he was a muzzleloader hunter, he still did really, really, really well with the seasons that he was given. But he's just one of those guys that was a great educator, a great teacher, and he just taught me an incredible amount of information. And I think I've got the mule deer bug. It's funny, I'm up here talking at a wild sheep. I've never had the opportunity to go hunt wild sheep, by the way. I'm still in the less than one. I don't know who all's in the less than one in here, but I'm guessing quite a few. I hope to hunt them someday. I just haven't been that lucky to draw a tag. I'm probably a little too cheap to ever buy one, but someday, hopefully. But Ron got my fire lit for mule deer, and mule deer are my number one, always have been, in certain type terrains. And I think with the help of him, he's the one that just kind of inspired me and got me really going and working hard at being a really, really good mule deer hunter. It was from Ron. And I almost hate throwing this picture up there because it feels like a bragging session. But with Ron's guidance, his help of helping me plan out trips, out-of-state trips, going through, mapping everything out, detailing everything out. This is what I was afforded, being around a guy like that. But Ron was. So I would spend countless hours with this guy, and he was very, very giving with all his time. And he would always help me out as far as the planning of these big trips and these big adventures. Mr. Blood, my biggest mentor of all time, Mr. Blood. He's got the best name of all time too, as a mentor, as an elk hunter. Dallas Blood was his name. North Idaho guy. How I met Dallas was after I stopped guiding in Alaska and Russia, I'd come back and I'd take fly fishermen out on these private lakes, and I would stock these lakes, and I would take guys out, teach them how to fly cast, and just show them a good time, allow them to catch a bunch of fish. They had a good time. I took some photos if I got them to the point where they were releasing them right and everything like that. I felt good about leaving them out there on the lake. Well, at the point that I'd get these guys fishing to where I didn't have to be there, I'd always shoot my bow. I'd just start shooting my bow into big hay bales around these lakes. And I had some of the old Seattle Seahawks out there at some point. I kind of got tied in with that group, and they would always come out. These guys love to fish. And John Freeze, quarterback for I think he was pretty famous in Idaho back in the day. This is way back. Held all the records. Well, I used to fish that guy out there all the time. Loved to fly fish. Loved to catch big trout. And he always saw me out there flinging my bow or flinging my arrows around with my bow. And one time he walked up to me and he said, "Hey, I see you love bow hunting." And I said, yeah, I do. I've just never really done it, like I want to. I've struggled on elk with a bow. I've done really well with a muzzleloader, but it's something I really want to learn how to archery elk hunt with a bow. And he said, "Well, you know what? I've got this old baseball coach of mine, and his name is Mr. Blood. The guy's probably sharpening broadheads as we speak right now. He's just that kind of a guy. He lives for it, right? And so, well, heck, bring the guy out to my lake. I'd love to have him out there. Just bring him out free of charge. I'd love to pick his brain, talk to a guy like that." He's had a lot of success. And so, sure enough, a few weeks later, John Freeze brings old Dallas out to the lake, and I saddle up to him. He goes out in his little float tube. I saddle up to him all day long, and I fish next to old Dallas Blood. And he just fills my brain with all kinds of information. And it's good information, but there's like this hands-on thing. I want to see it for myself. And so, without me prompting him in any way, Dallas invites me. He said, "Hey, September's coming, a couple months out. Why don't you come over and I'll take you out and we'll see what we can do. I'll show you some things in the elk woods." And so I jumped on that opportunity. And that first year, this was late 90s probably. That first year, I go over there and I meet old Dallas. Dallas is he's an ex-mill worker. His wife's a mail carrier. And he was also a baseball coach and a track coach at times. And Dallas took me into his house. He wouldn't let me stay anywhere else. He just said, "Come on in. You're going to stay with me, and however much time you have, we'll hunt every day." And he had a lot of time on his hands. He was in his early to mid 60s, somewhere in that range, and retired. And so every day I spent with old Dallas. That first year I went over there, and the days were filled from, he was teaching me how to bugle. He was poking fun at people that had a certain type bugle. He was kind of an artery guy, and he would laugh at a lot of people on how they did things and their tactics and guys at cow call and all these things. He was real set in his ways, but the guy was beyond successful in the elk woods. And I knew that because of the stories he had when I went down into his basement and gawked at, his ridiculous amount of elk antlers on the wall that nobody ever saw. He didn't have them for display. He had them down in a basement somewhere, just piled up on this. There was 2 or 3 couches lined up. I don't know. He had a bunch of them. And there were some absolute giants in there that he had taken up in North Idaho, him and his boys. And, him being the gracious guy he did, he took all that time with me, and we would spend dawn to dusk every day chasing elk. And he was educating me on what I was doing wrong and maybe how I should go about it. I think we went through the first, let me go back. The first day I got there, we couldn't go out. So, like a good coach would do, he pulls out the old VCR tapes, and he throws those in there, and he had been recording. He would go to Yellowstone or go to all these places where you could see elk and how elk behave. And he would record these, and then he would put it in the VCR, and he would play by play tell me what's going to happen right here, what's going to cause these 2 bulls to come together and fight. And so we would sit there like studying tape on on football film, and we would go through the tape, and he'd say, "All right, you see how it's a challenge bugle at this point, how they're going to size each other up with a visual, blah blah blah." And he told me about the entire cadence of how elk come together and what it's going to take to pick a fight with a bull, because Dallas's his MO in the elk woods was, you're going to go out there and you want to pick a fight. You're not going to kind of push the foot around and cow call them in or anything like that. You want them to come in, and pick a fight, you want them to come in sideways. Things have changed a little bit since that, but that was his strategy, and it really, really worked. And, like I said, I spent that first year I went over there, and I spent 3 weeks with Dallas, and he gave me all that time. He didn't kill a bull, but I did, and he was perfectly fine with that. And he didn't need to do it, but he did. And I was super gracious and happy that he did that. And he became one of my best friends. I was just a young kid at the time, but he showed me a crud ton. And I went over there for the next few years, and he absolutely just filled my head with everything I needed to know on how to kill bulls, and how to kill them successfully, consistently. And I felt like I was the luckiest guy on the planet to have that information. And so being the good guy that he was always very gracious with his time. This is the first bull that I killed with Dallas. It wasn't a big bull, but what Dallas would do with me is he would say, all right, we hear a bugle down in this old basin at some point. And he'd say, well, you're up. What are you going to do? How are you going to tackle that bull? And I'd go down there, and usually what would happen is I'd pitch a bugle, he'd pitch a bugle, I'd pitch a bugle. I just get closer and closer. We've all played that game. And nothing ever happens. They just keep walking away, right? And that's what most people do. And so I'd come back after it got blown up, and he'd tell me exactly what I did wrong, which was great, because I was getting a play-by-play on what I did wrong, and he would then tell me what I needed to do to maybe get that bull to come in. And he was just really good at educating me in that way. He'd let me make my mistakes. I'd come back. He'd come back with, you probably should have tried this. And I felt like I gleaned so much information from him. From that point on, I found a lot of success in the elk woods. Like I said, 3 years with this guy, and he taught me all the little things that I had never read, I had never heard anybody talk about. Now in today's world, you'll hear these things on podcasts, and you'll hear them, through social and all those type things. But back then, it didn't exist. There weren't platforms to get this information out, so it was hard to find. Eastman's journals and other magazines and things of that nature. But for a kid just starting out and trying to figure this out for himself, it was a steep learning curve. But he helped me immensely. And from that point, with everything that he taught me, there was a lot of years of success. Every year, from the point that I met up with Dallas Blood, there was one year that I didn't get a bull killed with my archery tag from that year, and that was 20 some odd years ago. And I owe all that to Dallas. There's no doubt about it. Everything that he gave me, I was able to take that information and put it to use. And like I said, all these bulls that I've taken over the years, there's a handful of them right there. And without Dallas's help, that would have never happened. Now I do want to tell you guys this story. There was that one year I talk about where that year haunts me, where I didn't fill that elk tag. And I'm going to say that was probably 10, 12 years ago. 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And I had worked this bull. Washington has a short little 2-week window for hunting season. They don't give you much time. So I make sure I carved out those 2 weeks and had, every day available to me. I'd found this bull. I'd found this big old crusty bull. He's just an old ancient sucker. And it took me the entire 2 weeks to basically figure this thing out. This is the only bull I wanted to get. And I got so close so many times. But it was either win, I'd have to back out, all these different things. Had cows every day, and it was just difficult to get on this bull. Well, finally, on the very last day of the season, all my eggs in this basket. It was this bull or nothing. And I get down in there that day, and I start pulling out all the tricks that Dallas had taught me. Keeping sticks in my pocket, pouring water out from well above my head. Everything I can do to think of to get this bull to come in tight. And as soon as I finally had him pegged that day, that very last day, it was the last morning, I have this bull. He's screaming. I pick the fight. He's racing in. We've already done the thrashing, both back and forth, this and that, and he's coming. His eyes are rolled back. He's coming, and I see this bull coming down. He just breaks through the alders. He comes down through this thing, and he's going to come up, and he's going to be right there. Now he's going to be a frontal, but I'm assuming he's going to, pull his little sideways thing right when he comes in, because he's coming in to fight me. So I pull my bow back on that bull, and as soon as he comes up, I'm looking at his rack, but I shuffled because I was really close to a tree. I could touch that tree, so I shuffled a little bit. All of a sudden, I'm pretty darn close to shooting this bull. He's almost sideways up me, and there's bees everywhere. When I did that little shuffle, I kicked just this little dead, piece of limb. I kicked the nest, bees everywhere, and last thing I saw of that bull was it running that way because I was running this way. I dropped my bow the second those bees got up, because one thing, I have a kryptonite, and that is bees. I'm allergic to bees. Another story was when I was 14 years old, my dad had dropped me off grouse hunting, dove hunting by myself. He just left me for the day. He was going to come back at the end of the day. And when he came back, he couldn't find me because I was in a hospital because I'd been stung by a hornet after my dog kicked this nest. Fortunately, I got to a store and I died on the ambulance ride to the hospital that day. So I had this intense fear of bees. I would walk on water to get away from bees. Well, that day, as soon as I kicked that little nest, bees came up into the air, and that was it for me. But that was the 1 year where I did not fill my archery elk tag. So, all right. I think so. 11 years ago, I became a father. Me and my wife, we started a little late. She went through medical school. We started a little late. So I'm pretty old now, but I've got an 11-year-old and a 4-year-old. And it was pretty cool. This is one of my favorite hunts right here. I just had to tell this story. I don't think it fits much, but I had to tell this story because when I think about all the hunts that I've done in my life, this one stands out as the most memorable. I remember every single detail of this hunt is because my daughter was involved in it. And so how this hunt turned out was happened to be, if you're a Washington guy, every August you have the opportunity to go out and hunt black bears on the West Coast. Not necessarily the West Coast, but the North Cascades. August 1st is when it opens. And summertime, and we were homeschooling our kids back then. Anyway, but we ended up having a few days to put together, and I decided to grab my daughter, throw together a pack, and just kind of crudely come up with this plan. Like, I'm going to take my daughter up into the hills and see if I can't come up with a little bear hunt for her. So the drive up. Now, I didn't even tell my wife what we were doing that day. I think I told her we were going hiking, and she was okay with that. I did not tell her we were going bear hunting. There was a little bit of a reason for that, but so I took Bailey and I hopped in the truck, backpack loaded, ended up. I didn't know how far I was going to get. I knew a spot where I wanted to go where the berries would be popping, and I probably have a pretty good crack at seeing a bear, but I knew it was about 8-9 miles from the trailhead. I've got an 8-year-old girl with me. 8-9 miles seems like a lot, so I'm not really sure how this trip is going to pan out. But we got an early jump that morning, started up the trail. We're getting like a couple miles in, and I'm like feeling her out, like how you doing? How's things going? And she was all, kind of giddy to get up that trail and do it. What I had done that morning is I built a little scavenger hunt list. So you know how kids are, they kind of have to be entertained, and I thought maybe if I build this little scavenger hunt list, she'll always be thinking ahead, like what she's looking for, just kind of keep her involved. And there was everything from see a goat to catch a fish to kill a bear to pick a huckleberry to find a feather flying flower. Anything I could think of that would get us further into this hike, because I knew I would lose her at probably mile 3 or 4 if I didn't do that. But she's tough. She's really tough. 8 years old, I ended up getting her to where I think we got to about mile 6, and she stepped off the trail, stepped into a bee's nest, and got stung like 3 times. Now I'm thinking this jig is up probably, but she's tough. She cried a little bit, got back on the trail, threw a little backpack on, and kept going. And it took us all day, but we got to mile 9. We got to where I wanted to get to by the end of that day. Probably had 20 minutes of daylight at the end of it. And the berries were incredible when we got there. High hopes, because up in that country there's a lot of bears. You typically see a lot of bears. On a good berry year, you just happen to get into them, or you will get into them. But I had just hiked my daughter 9 miles, and I'd say we probably covered about 4,500 feet of elevation, which is no small feat for anyone, especially an 8-year-old. And she carried her pack for most of this trip, till we hit the steeps, and I would say she carried it for about 6 miles of this trip. And then I just went ahead and tossed it on mine and doubled up. But I was so impressed with her actually getting to this spot that I was going to do anything and everything to make this a fun trip for her. So that night, I had this little solo tent. I was trying to go as super light as possible, so I got a little solo tent, but I was not expecting any kind of weather at all. It's middle of summer. This is probably mid-August. And sometime in the middle of the night, we got some clouds roll in, and it starts just dumping rain. We weren't prepared for that. I had a couple rain jackets, but that was about it. The boots weren't ready for rain by any stretch. Our tent wasn't ready for rain. It was a small one. So we get up in the morning and it's just pouring. My daughter really wants to get out. She wants to go see this little lake that was up there and go catch some fish. She also wants to go find a bear, and she wants to kill that bear. Now, on that night prior, we did see a couple of billy goats, so we got that checked off of our little checklist. A couple of goats up in there, but so we get up and we're eating food, and it's just raining and raining and raining and raining. And I'm getting pretty bummed out because I'm thinking, man, I'm where I want to be. I've got my little girl with me. The berries are right where they should be. We're probably going to have pretty good success. I just need this cloud to get off this mountain. And about 10 o'clock that morning, it finally did. And the cloud lifted. I ended up tearing down camp as fast as I could, piled it up. I took her down this ridge. And we start blasting. She's got her own little set of binos there, and I've got mine. And we find a bear. We find a bear, and he's probably 2.5 miles away. And the only way we're going to get there is if we kind of scale this little cliff. And I didn't have any climbing gear with me, but she really wanted to go. I mean, she's to the point where she was like wanting to slide down on her butt down these rocks to try to get down this. We could go get that bear. And I kind of had to, call her off. I was like, there's no way we can't. If we don't get a bear, maybe it's going to be fine. We'll be okay. But it's not safe to go get that bear. Well, so I kind of knew of a little spot where we might, get a better look at some different area and maybe get a crack at the bear. And so we did that, picking berries the entire way, just having a great time with my daughter. The country up there, as you can see, it's just this is Washington, North Cascades. It's amazing. We had a ton of fun at times just picking berries, and she had a blast. But we ended up seeing 3 bears. 2 of them we couldn't get to, and then we found one that was a couple hundred yards out. We got set up, and I ended up shooting that bear. Well, it got caught up. There was a bunch of cliffs. It's really, really cliffy country. It got caught up in the cliffs, and unfortunately, it was tangled up in there, and it didn't fall off the other side. And there was a point where I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do here? I can't, I got to get that bear unplugged, and so I had to leave my daughter down on the bottom, rope off with parachute cord, and shimmy my way down and kind of work that bear off that ledge, and I broke it free from that brush, and he went tumbling down, and my daughter saw him tumble down. And talk about a happy kid when we finally got that bear. But you can see the country that we were in. It was just absolutely amazing. But we ended up getting this bear, and my daughter was probably the happiest I've ever seen her. She actually got to see for, with her own 2 eyes, what her dad kind of does up in the high country in the mountains. And she loves wild game meat. She loves elk heart, deer heart, bear heart. It doesn't matter. It's her favorite. And so, bless her heart, she helped me break this thing down. And she had her little backpack, so we put a little tiny chunk of meat in her little backpack. And she helped, as much as she could. And we climbed out of that hole, and it was a pretty nasty spot. We had to dump down about I don't know, 900 feet of elevation just down where this bear had fallen, and then climb back up this chute and get out to where we could get back to our camp and hike out. And we only had 2 days. This is late in the day, it's getting dark. Now we still have 9 miles to get back to the truck that night. And, you know, we had already covered a couple miles that day. But in 2 days, my 8-year-old covered 20 miles. And she helped me pack that bear out most of the way. That backpack of hers ended up on mine again, but man, what a trooper. And definitely, you know, I got more out of that hunt just watching my daughter do her thing and enjoy it and kind of see what I do instead of just hearing the stories. You got to see it for yourself. But by far one of the best experiences I've ever had. It wasn't the best experience when I got home because my wife still didn't know I was bear hunting, but she forgave me probably after a week or two. But yeah, so I just had to tell that story. It's one of my favorites. One of the things that I'm kind of involved in right now, my wife and I both, we run this podcast, Hunt Harvest Health podcast, and we do these Western hunting summits that we put on now. And what they are is it's an event where I take 2 days and I take guys up onto the mountain, show these people, you know, a mini adventure, an experience, and then we have 2 days in the classroom where we have archery competitions, and we just basically go from all the ins and outs of setting up a Western hunt, coming out west and doing a hunt on their own. And the target is anybody and everybody who wants to come out and try to figure out, you know, what we do out west. A lot of guys from the east, they have no idea. They dream about coming out west, but they really don't have an idea how to do it. So we've set up these little Western hunting summits to kind of promote Western hunting, get guys into it, really want to kind of grow, you know, the knowledge for folks that want to try something like this. And that's something that we've done as of late. And it's interesting because I feel like I've come full circle in my life where, you know, I learned so much growing up as a kid that got mentored by these 3 amazing men who took the time and, you know, all the years that they had of experience, they ended up, you know, passing that down to me. And I'll be honest, for a lot of my life, I've been one pretty selfish dude as far as like giving up knowledge. Definitely none of us want to give up spots, but just knowledge in general, because I was always, you know, I didn't want the competition so much up there. But it took a lot of years, and I think what sparked it was that hunt with my daughter, where I finally saw what people get out of taking other people out into the wild and actually getting to teach them and show them, educate them on these things that we all love. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, is the same way. You know, we're privy to a lot of really good, amazing things up on the mountains that some people just didn't grow up with a good mentor. Maybe their father didn't do it. Maybe they didn't have an uncle that did it. Maybe they never got an invite from a guy that lived in North Idaho. And, you know, they're missing out. I had a gentleman this year come with me. I invited this gentleman to come with me on a deer hunt in Idaho. He's kind of a wicked smart dude. He's kind of a keto, really in the healthosphere type guy. And he had an interest. He's one of my wife's friends in the medical community. He had an interest in hunting. Just, he'd never done it before. He didn't come from a hunting family in any way, but he was curious about it. He understands like the logic when it comes to good, clean meat, wild game, the advantages of it versus some of the other. And I thought, man, it'd be really cool to get a guy like that out there on the mountain, just see what he thinks of it, see his opinion, see what he gets out of it. And so we invited this gentleman out. His name was Mike Munsell, and he I mean, he would tell it better than me, but we took this guy out and we had him out there for, I think, 8 days. And a guy that just had not been on the mountain, he hadn't done a whole lot of camping. We took him into the wilds of Idaho, showed him what we do, taught him how to glass, taught him how to backpack hunt, showed him what to look for, showed him deer behavior, talked about the migration routes, talked about all these different things that we look for and that we have figured out. A lot of these things that we've already forgotten, they kind of become new again when you're teaching somebody like that, and it's pretty cool to watch. But Mike left that trip. Although he didn't have a deer tag, he wasn't able to harvest his own deer. He left that trip with this appreciation for what we do. And now, I mean, the guy was in tears when he left because he kind of realized that there was this thing that he'd been missing in his life. He was one of those West Washington guys that has spent probably too much time over there in the city. There's this thing that we do, that most of us here do, that we're privy to, but a lot of people aren't. And he's one of those guys. He's never been privy to it. He's never had opportunity to go. He's never had opportunity given to actually go out there and see what it is that we do. And so we took him out, and the guy's a changed man. You know, he came out of there and he picked up all these little things that we just haven't even thought of. You know, the things that he saw were things that we don't even look at anymore. But he picked them up, and it was pretty cool to watch. I guess the point of me saying that is, you know, with a room like this where there's just so many of you are so educated and so involved and have so much, you know, to give and so much wisdom. I'm sure a lot of you guys have done a lot of hunts over your years, spent a lot of time in the mountains. And I highly encourage and recommend anybody try to look outside, not just within our community, but outside of the community as well, and try to get people just to see what it is that we do. And I think you'd be surprised at how many people kind of glom onto this and figure it out for what it is. And it's just a good, clean, solid, honest lifestyle that we all enjoy. But if there's anything I'd kind of like to leave is just that. If you have the opportunity and somebody shows any interest at all, even if they don't maybe offer it up, that's kind of what I want to do with my life from here on out, and that's educate and try to get people on the mountain that haven't had those mentors, so maybe now I can be one. So that's about it. I'm going to leave it with that.